The Parshas Vayeishev, and first let me thank David for being kind enough to circulate these pages from Minchas Osher of Rav Osher Zelig Weiss. He has here two simonim that caught my attention. He's got much more here. And the first one that I want to study with you today is Simon Ayin Hey, which is Machlokas Reuvein Yehuda. So the issue is whether or not the debate here between Reuvein and Yehuda was something that would be based on halacha. Now, just by general comment, to say that, two shvatim are arguing in halacha is a little bit far-fetched, but when you read the psukim and you see the Ramban, you really get that impression that there's something going on here above and beyond the question of shall we throw Yosef into the bar or shall we do away with him in some other way. Reuven says, "Vayomer aleim Reuven al tishbechu dam," and that phrase can be understood halachically as shvichus damim, which is murder. Don't murder him. Hashlichu oso el habar hazeh. Throw him into the pit. Well, is that not an act of murder? Yehuda, Reuven himself opens up by saying, Al tishbechu dam. Don't be guilty of murder. Don't implement an act which would constitute shvichas damim, namely murder. Obviously, then Reuven is shooting for something that does not qualify as murder. So what does he suggest? Hashlichu osol abar. Throw him into a bar. I mean, is that not murder? So let's just think for a moment uh, how Yosef is going to fare at the bottom of this bar. First of all, the bar has no water in it. And as a result, Yosef is going to die of thirst, of tzameh, what's called tzameh, tzimaon, lack of water. Secondly, the bar is filled with akrovim, scorpions, nechashim, serpents. And we'll soon see that the Gemara says that if you kill a person by sending a serpent to bite him, then you are a murderer. So what did Reuven hope to gain by saying, no, al tishbechu dam, don't murder him, but hashlichu el habar? And again, he repeats himself and he says, v'yad al tishlechu bo. Yehuda, on the other hand, seems to assume that throwing Yosef into the bar would be an act of murder. And he says, therefore, Vayomer Yehuda elochiv elechov ma betzaki narog es achinu. Now, if you translate that literally, what monetary gain will we have by murdering Yosef? But instead, nimkarenu leishmaelim, let's sell him at a price. So that Yehuda is defining throwing Yosef into the bar as an act of murder. And that's why he says, narog esachinu. What do we gain financially by murdering our brother? Seemingly, he is classifying the act of throwing Yosef into the bar as murder. Here, Reuven had said, by throwing into the bar, we're not going to be shofech damim. We will not be qualified and condemned as murderers. And Yehuda is saying that by throwing him into the bar, Naragenu, we are killing him. Hariga is Ritzicha, is murder. Joe?
So I'm sorry, maybe I came in late. This is when Yehuda says this, they've already thrown him into the bore. The pasuk says what Reuven had planned to do that he wasn't planning. It's we're talking about a understanding of possibly time makes a difference with regards to how long you put him in the bore, and maybe that also is a question of whether or not how you're going to define it as whether it's going to be murder or
Well,
not.
let me make two comments, Joe. First of all, you're 100% right that Yosef is already down in the bottom of the bar. And we know he's still alive because otherwise the whole story wouldn't take place, right? So
Right.
he's alive. Yehuda seems to be assuming, therefore, that if we leave him in the bar, we are murderers. Because it might be a matter of time, maybe 5 minutes, 10 minutes. How long will it take? But your comment is very well placed because maybe in a situation where it would take a longer period of time until he would die, like let's say, for example, the sun is not yet blazing. It's early in the morning. And you tie someone down in a way that when the sun comes out, the burning sun is going to kill him. So, how long before you tied him down, or let me say it the other way around, how long is it going to take from the time you tie him down until the time that he's going to perish? That might be a factor to consider. But getting back to square one, Reuven seems to assume that throwing him into the bar, unless you want to assume that Reuven is being very naive, not knowing, the dangers and the imminent death that's going to be caused by throwing him into the bar, but assuming that all the facts on the ground are clear and understood by both Reuven and Yehuda, then how do you describe a situation in which you throw someone in the bottom of a pit, he has no way out, there's no water there, and there are only serpents and scorpions? That's all that you have down there in the pit. I remember when I was a youngster, I used to watch James Bond. You remember James Bond? What were they called? 007 or something? So, do you remember that? There was a scene there that I'll never forget. A lot of scenes there that I'll never forget. Mostly about murder, by the way. But one of them was where they put a scorpion on James Bond, as he's sleeping. Do you remember that? And he's sweating away. You remember that scene? You know, how long will it take for Yosef to be killed in the bar? So let's assume the facts on the ground are such that unless we pull Yosef out of the bar immediately, he's going to die within minutes. Under that assumption, nevertheless, Reuven says, Al tishbechu dam, throw him into the bar, and don't be guilty of murder. And Yehuda turns around and says, Ma betzaki narog esachinu. If we leave him into the bar, we are considered murderers. So in the Minchas Osher, he claims that the issue of throwing someone into a bar and causing his death comes under the category of grama. Now, as you know, if you're learning the Nezikin part of Shas, whether it be damages and compensation thereof, whether it be injuring a person, killing a person, all that comes under an issue of Maisa versus Groma. Did you directly cause the damage? Did you directly cause that person's death, or was it indirect? And that distinction, by the way, this is on the side between Maisa and Groma, is very relevant to Masechta Shabbos. Because in Shabbos, you're not chayiv for Groma. And in Ezekin, Groma ben Ezekin potter. You're not chayiv to pay damages for Groma. In the case of murder, you will be put to death as a murderer unless it was Groma. And if it's Groma, and you cause someone his death, then you're not going to be put to death for violating a capital crime of murder. And now the question becomes, in throwing a person into a bar, is that called a Maisa Ritzicha, or is that called a Groma? And intuitively, we can identify with Reuven's argument that throwing someone into the bar is Groma. It's an indirect murder, but not a direct murder. If you bludgeon someone to death, that's a direct Maisa Ritzicha. You take a stick and you keep banging at him, or you take a knife and put it through his heart. That's an act of murder. But throwing someone into the bar is merely setting up his ultimate death. You are putting him into a situation in which you know for sure he's going to die. But you didn't directly kill him. And that's the argument of Reuven. We have to understand what Yehuda was saying, that if we leave him in the bar, we are guilty of hariga. Now, the Ramban, in his commentary on the statement of Reuven, he adds the following words. He says, Ein onesh hagorem ka onesh hashofech dam biyadayim. And there are two chidushim here in the Ramban with regard to Reuven. Chiddush number one is that certainly Groma is punishable. It's definitely prohibited. Reuven's not going to deny that by throwing someone into the bar and he's going to die, that he is guilty of a crime, a hideous, terrible crime, and he'll be punished for that. Chiddush number two in the Ramban is that there are different levels of severity, and we have to create a kind of a hierarchy with regard to Ritzicha. And at this point, the Ramban is saying the nafkamina between that which is lower on the totem pole and that which is all the way on top is going to be the onish. What kind of onish will you get? And the level of the severity of the crime is going to be reflected in the onish. And therefore, the Ramban insists that Reuven's argument was that since Groma is not punished in the same severe way with a capital punishment as Ritzicha b'maisa, a direct Ritzicha, that proves that it's less of a crime. And therefore we downgrade on the scale, on this Richter scale, on this totem pole and hierarchy, we downgrade Groma. Ritzicha al yidei Groma is not to be equated with Ritzicha Yeshira, with a direct Ritzicha. And therefore the punishment is going to be lessened. I mean, if that be the case, then it's just a skip and a hop to say that Yehuda understood that even Groma is considered Ritzicha. So in other words, when the halacha says that someone who causes the death of someone else is not punished in the same way of a direct murderer, what is the halacha really saying? Reuven understood that the halacha is really saying that that's not Ritzicha. It's definitely prohibited, it's definitely punishable, but it's not Ritzicha. Call it a different category. But you're not a Rotzeach. Yehuda, on the other hand, is going to say, okay, you know what? There's a lessening of the punishment, but it's still called Ritzicha. Now, additionally, we have a Rashbam, and the Rashbam, in his commentary on the Pasuk of Reuven's Hashlichu Osol Bar, V'yamus me'elov. The word me'elov means indirect, me'elov, not through our action, but me'elov. He'll die in the bar because of natural causes, whether it be the lack of hydration, whether it be the serpent or the scorpion. And the Rashbam makes the following interesting comment. There's no water in the bar. Now, you and I thought that what is the meaning of the fact that Chazal say there's no water in the bar? It means he's going to die of lack of water, but that's not the Rashbam. The Rashbam understands it differently. And the Rashbam is claiming that if there was water in the bar, then Yosef would immediately drown. And when you throw someone into the water and he drowns to death, that is murder. Im haya im kain, meaning if there was water, hayu matbin means to drown someone, umemisin also biyadayim. So Reuven's argument is that there's no water in the bar, and therefore we're not drowning him. The Haim Amru, and the prominent speaker is going to be Yehuda. V'yada al tishluchu bo. That's very interesting here because we thought that V'yad al tishluchu bo are the words coming out of the mouth of Reuven to justify why we should not throw him into the bar. But the Rashbam has a different twist. And according to the Rashbam, V'yad al tishluchu bo are the words of the Shvatim, the other brothers. And they're saying, and again, apparently, because there are a few psukim in the middle, we'd have to go through all the psukim, but they haven't yet thrown him into the bar. And they're claiming that if we throw them into the bar, that itself is Ritzicha. Now we turn to the next page, which is Tafresh Beis, and a Gemara in Sanhedrin. Shisa Boas HaNochash. There's a Machlokes Tanoim about a case where you send a Nochash to bite someone and kill him. Nechleku Rabbi Yehuda v'Chachamim. So Rabbi Yehuda says that that's an act of murder, and you'll be put to death for that. However, the Chachamim, and we paskin like the Chacham say you potter. And the Rambam in Perek Gimel Hilchos Rotzeach paskins like the Chachamim, and he explains that Eino Horig Biyadayim. What's going to kill the person is the bite of the serpent, as the serpent projects the toxic poison into the body of the victim. So you're only considered a groma, but not a Horig Biyadayim. So the Rambam's logic here to explain the Chachamim Shita about Shisa Boas HaNachash would really be the underlying argument and logic of Reuvein. And that's what both the Ramban and the Rashbam in their commentaries, respectively, they emphasize. That Reuven's argument is that there's no Ritzicha B'Yadayim here, it's only Groma. So what does Yehuda hold? Why does Yehuda say that he's a murderer? Or we are murderers if we leave Yosef in the bar. So here, Abosai, we have to raise the following chakira. You know that a chakira means two sides of a coin. When we say that grama in Ritzicha is patur, what do we mean by that? Okay, you paskin like Chachamim. It's not a Maisa B'Yadayim. It's not Hariga B'Yadayim. It's only grama. What are you saying? And there are two ways of interpreting it. One way, which I think is Yehuda's way, is that you are a Rotzeach, but there's a P'tur Onshim. There's a technical reason why we alleviate the capital punishment. The other way of saying it is not Ritzich at all. And that would be Reuven's argument. So if you take a look, again, the pages that you got, on the paragraph that starts with L'choret Tzadak Reuvein, on the right column, Di ein bozeh din Ritzicha. However, is it really so that we paskin like Chachamim that you're potter in Groma because it's not Ritzicha? Look at the Rambam in Perek Beis Mehilchos Rotzeach. And there the Rambam speaks about Groma in the case of Hasocher Horeg Larogas Chavero, right? Mafioso style, you pay off a hitman to kill someone. Or, alternatively, Shekofas Chavero, he ties him down, the Nichol Lefnei Ari, and he places him in front of the lion. The Chayotze Bazen, other cases of Groma. Kol Echad Me'elu Shofech Damimhu. The Rambam is outspoken about the fact that he is a Rotzeach. V'avon hariga biyado. He has violated lo tirtzach. V'chayav misa. Right, if you stop and take a breath here, it sounds like we're going to put him to death. La shomayim. Right, we have done in B'dinei Adam, there's that which we do here in the Beis Din Shel Mata, and then there's done in B'din Shamayim. In Din Shamayim, he is going to be judged as a murderer, but Ein B'hem Misa B'Beis Din. Beis Din cannot put him to death. It's almost as if the hands of Beis Din are tied. They really want to put this guy to death, but they can't do so. Of course, it's not a Maisa B'Yadayim, and the Torah says that the Beis Din can't put him to death. But in Shamayim, he is a murderer and he'll be put to death. Now, exactly when and how he'll be put to death, that's a different story. So now, Yehuda makes a lot of sense. Even though Yehuda will concede that this is only Grama, Yehuda will concede that we down here in Beis Din cannot put a person to death because it's not the highest direct level of Ritzicha, but nevertheless he is Rotzeh. Avon hariga biyado. Chayav misa l'shamayim. Shofech damimhu. I mean, it's interesting how the Rambam repeats himself 3 times in 3 different ways, but he wants to emphasize the point that this is Ritzicha. And that makes sense according to Yehuda. Now, the Minchas Osher takes another few stabs at this. I think this is secondary, but I'll just mention it in passing. Number one, he says maybe even the Rambam holds that avon hariga biyodo is not really a full-fledged ritzicha. It's avon hariga biyodo, like it's what we call avizrayu de ritzicha. Are you familiar with that term, avizrayu? Like, for example, in Avodah Zarah, there's something called avizrayu de Avodah Zarah. It's not the real McCoy direct Avodah Zarah, but it's avizrayu de Avodah Zarah. You know, you give somebody a tree that he's going to worship. Or in Gili Arayis, we have avizrayu de Gili Arayis. And now we have a case of avizrayu de ritzicha. It's not the full-fledged ritzicha, but it is to be classified as ritzicha. And therefore, it's possible that even Reuvein, I'm sorry, let's scratch that, even Yehuda would admit that we're not talking about a ritzicha. And when the Rambam says Havon ritzicha biyado, the Rambam is only referring to this sort of generic, all-encompassing of Israel de ritzicha. And then he adds another possibility, and this is very fundamental. What is the status of the Shvatim before Maimon Har Sinai? We know that the sanctity of Klal Yisrael was generated at Maimon Har Sinai, Na'aseh v'nishma. They brought karbanos, they did the milah, and then the Kabbalah's whole mitzvahs as a maisa of commitment to the Torah at Har Sinai. So what was the status of the Achim before Matan Torah? Are they to be classified as Bnei Noach? They have all the laws of Bnei Noach. Or should we classify them as Bnei Yisrael? How do we judge them? And then Afkamina is going to be, in this case, of Gram Ritzicha, because a Ben Noach is put to death for Gram Ritzicha, whereas Yisrael is not. So that Reuven was arguing based on the assumption that our status is that of Klal Yisrael, of a Ben Yisrael. Whereas Yehuda would say, well, we are still before Maimon Har Sinai. Linachri, as far as the Ben Noach is concerned, and here we're going on to page Tafresh Gimel, Ein Ben Gorem Misa LeHoreg B'Yadayim, Shneim Chayovim Misa B'Bezdin. And he quotes the Rambam in Perek Tes Milchos Malachim. Therefore, according to the Rambam, if a guy would take someone, whether it's another guy or a Jew, and tie him up in front of a lion, or leave him to die from lack of hydration, Nerag, he would be put to death in the Bezdin. So therefore, it makes sense that Yehuda, maybe I said it the other way around before, but to correct myself, Yehuda is maintaining that our status before Matan Torah is equal to that of Bnei Noach, and therefore we are guilty of murder if we throw him or leave him in the pit. Reuven, on the other hand, was arguing, no, our status is that of Bnei Yisrael. We're already a separate entity, and therefore it's only grown. Okay, at this point, since time is working against us, and we have mincha, so let's fast forward to Simon Ayin Tes. Now, you may remember at the end of this week's Parshas Vayeishev, we have the episode of Tamar. And if you recall, Tamar is being taken out to be burnt at the stake. And all she has to do is publicly declare that it's Yehuda who is guilty here. He's the Boel. But she refuses to do so. She sends him the psil and the chosemes, and she says, Hakirna, why don't you recognize it? And you'll know what's going on over here. How come I'm pregnant? So Chazal repeat themselves over and over again that what do we derive from Tamar? She's about to be burnt at the stake. Noach lo li adam sheyapil atzmo lekivshan ha'esh ve'al yalbin pnei chavero barabin. A person should be willing to take the most severe death and die rather than humiliate someone publicly. And therefore Tamar will not humiliate Yehuda, even though it means that she'll die at the stake. She realizes full well that Yehuda doesn't have to do anything. Yehuda has no clue that he's the one who's guilty, and if he decides not to recognize the chotemet, the psil, then she'll die at the stake. And she's willing to do so. Just not to humiliate another person publicly. So the Minchas Osher wants to know, is this halacha? Or maybe it's just an agadic statement about, a chassid, somebody who wants to really be tremendously pious. Are there situations in which you have to give up your life rather than violate the Torah? On the one hand, the Torah says, V'chai bohem, v'lo sheyamas bohem. On the other hand, there are gimel averos chamuros. Should we add a fourth one? Should we say that Kedei shelo lahalbin pnei chaver barabim, you have to give up your life, Yehargal Yavar? Or, to be more precise, more accurate about formulation, shall we say that humiliating someone publicly is considered an act of ritzicha? Right? The blood that flows through his face is going to freeze in its place. He turns white from humiliation, and that's considered ritzicha. And Rav Weiss here, in this essay, is fighting a crusade, so to speak, against what I thought, until a certain point, was just a phantom Rishon or Achron or Posek that doesn't really exist, that holds that, yes, you have to give up your life rather than humiliate someone publicly. And I say that at first thought, I wondered why Rav Weiss is bothering with this. Like, who's he fighting against? I mean, he's going to argue that for sure there's no Yeharg Val Yavor in order not to humiliate someone. It can't be. And he's going to tell you why it can't be. Why is he fighting this battle? Who in their right mind would take the Gemara literally when the Gemara says, Noach lo li adam? Which posek, which Rambam, which Shulchan Aruch, where is it in the Rif, in the Tur, in any of the Machabrei HaPoskim that would claim that we have to learn from Tamar that you have to die rather than humiliate someone publicly? Where is it? Why is the Minchas Osher fighting this battle? Until I saw him quoting Rabbeinu Yonah in the Shari Tshuva. Take a look on page Taf Reish Chaf Gimel, last paragraph. And the Shari Tshuva says, Gama vizrayu davodah zora, v'gili arayos, dinam yehareg val yavor, v'gama vizrayu de avodah de ritzicha. And included under the category of Avizrayu de ritzicha, where the Rabbeinu Yonah says yehareg val yavor, he has halbonas pnei chaveru barab. Keshem she'amru yeharg val yavor, kach amru noach lo li'adam sheyapil atzvo l'kivshan eish v'al yalbin pnei chaver barab. Pretty outspoken about it. Not only that, but he finds a Rashbates. This is on the bottom right column of Taf Reish Chaf Dalet. And the Rashbates wrote a a authored a work on on Pirkei Avos. It's called Magen Avot, and he writes, "Kimoshe yesh bi akum be'ovid kochav mazolos v'gili arayos yehard val yavar betoldos kayotzebo toldos meaning of Israel kain betoldos ritzicha shehi be'hareg val yavar halbana." I mean, he can't be more black and white than that. So we're talking about two Rishonim, one a little bit later than the earlier Rishonim, but nevertheless, Rabbeinu Yonah is up there. I mean, he's a younger contemporary of the Rambam, really. And one of the later Achronim, the Rashbetz. Then he quotes the Shalah in Vayeishev, "Afil lahatzil nefashos lo yalbin." Even if it's an issue of hatzolas nefashos, die without hatzolah rather than embarrass someone publicly. So this, my friends, is the justification for the Minchas Osher's tirade, I call it. It's impossible, he says. You know, Reb Chaim Brisker, apparently, according to the legend, got up at one of these meetings of the Rabbanim, and one of the Rabbanim quoted a Tosfos to prove his point, and Reb Chaim said there is no such Tosfos. Later on, they asked Reb Chaim, "Do you know every Tosfos in Shas?" And he said, there cannot be such a Tosfos. Das kann nicht sein. So first, the Minchas Osher lines up a very long list of commentaries that argue that this is only a Midas Chasidus. For example, the Meiri in Brachos says, "Derech tzachus, amru noach lo liolam shiapel asmo kivshana eish, val yalbim pnei chaver barabim." It's derech tzachus. Tzachus means when you want to make a point, so you over exaggerate. So that the idea of noach lo li adam is kind of like conveying a moral statement, sort of a like an inspirational statement. Noach lo li adam. So we're now on the bottom of Taf Reish Chaf Dalid. And he says it's impossible. You can't take the Gemara literally as a psak, as a final ruling in halacha. He says if you're going to take the Gemara literally, then if you know that Reuvein is about to embarrass Shimon publicly, you would have to take the life of Reuvein. Reuvein is therefore a rodef. Anyone who's about to kill someone is considered a rodef, and you mitzvah latzilo benafsho. You have to kill the rodef in order to save the nirdav. He says anyone who would say that you're allowed to kill someone who's about to embarrass someone is a shota. He's just simply stupid. That's how Rav Weiss likes to dramatize his statement. He says a person is about to be embarrassed on Shabbos. Are you allowed to violate the Shabbos in order to preserve his life because his embarrassment is like his death? No one would say such a thing. The Gemara says in Bab Metzia, in the same sugya, Noach lo li'adam sheyaval sofek eshes ish ve'al yalbin pnei chaveru barabin. Again, the word Noach lo. Does anyone take this literally? That the halacha is you're allowed to have relationship with a woman who might be an eshes ish in order to prevent someone from being embarrassed? There's no such psak halacha, no such heter. Al Korchenu, he says we have no choice. But b'derech haflaga amru, v'lo b'derech halacha. This haflaga. Haflaga means, to inspire us, to exaggerate, but it's not real halacha. The Gemara, for example, says that lashon hara is shakul keneged gimel averos chamuros Shabbat Torah. Are you going to tell me that the din is yeharik val yavar? You have to give up your life rather than speak lashon hara? Are you going to tell me that if I know that someone is about to speak lashon hara, I'm allowed to kill him because he's a rodev? Who could say such a thing? But he does admit that the Aruch LaNer, whose last name was Ettlinger, he was the Rebbe, if you remember, from Shimshel Fol Hirsch in Germany about 2 centuries ago. He says that there's a din of Yehareg Val Yavar Mamish with regard to Albonas Panim. And Ravai says, I cannot accept it. Yesh Litmoah. Lo matzinu halacha zu lo barambam v'lo b'shulchan aruch v'lo b'poskim. None of the poskim have this halacha in their compendiums of legal texts. And he takes comfort in the fact that Rabbi Yeshua Lev Diskin, the Rav of Yerushalayim, was asked the question, is there a din of Yeharg Val Yavar regarding Halbonis Panim? And he right away says it's impossible. So the Mariel Diskin is a pretty big posek to rely on. He says the following. If somebody puts a gun into your head and says, murder someone, or I'll murder you, you're not allowed to murder him. Because he'll die and you'll survive. My chazis, who says your blood is redder than his. But in this case, if you die, rather than be malbim upon him, then you're dead, he's alive, and not only that, if you will go ahead and embarrass him, he will still be alive. So the whole mechanism and svara of my chazis is inapplicable in this case, because even if the person is a victim of public humiliation, he still remains alive. And therefore, Masha Amru Chazal Noach Lo Li'adam V'chulu Ein Ze Ele Derech HaFlaga Uleguzma Amru V'tamar Na'aga Lifnim Mishur Sadin. Then they showed the Mariel Diskin a couple of those sources that we mentioned earlier. He was this Paul that he didn't know about those sources, that he forgot them or whatever. Afal Pichein Oman al Shalom, nevertheless he insisted that he's correct. Lo Yitochein Lomar Kain. And then they asked the question to the Gaon from Lublin, and he said also, you have to reinterpret the Tosfos or whatever source you have. Okay, then this is where we'll stop for today. I have 2 minutes before I have to leave to Mincha. If anybody wants to make any comments, now's the time. Yeah, David. You have to speak a drop louder for some reason.
discussion about Rama and Seichel and all these things. It says basically is that throwing Yosef in a pit is ideal because the animals have no bechira, so they're going to do the rest of Hashem no matter what. So then it's totally beyond Hashem. They're not hiding anything. And if Dan will fight him and kill him, now
Right.
what? You know,
I didn't hear everything you said, David, but I think the gist of what you're saying is that Reuven was arguing, let's not kill Yosef directly. God will decide whether he should survive or not survive. And if he dies, it's sort of like in the hands of the divine being, and it's an act of divine providence. We didn't kill him, but the Almighty had him die.
exactly.
That's what I think you were saying. And that's also a little bit hinted in the Ramban, if you take a look at the Ramban's Pshat on the Torah. So basically, Reuven was saying, let's leave it up to, up to Shammai, but we're not going to kill him directly. And now the question is, according to Yehuda, Laman Argenu, maybe Yehuda was arguing that this would be an act of Ritzicha. You can't blame it on providence. You can't blame it on God. This is not divine intervention. We threw him into the bar, and immediately he's going to die. Okay, then. Thank you so much. Good to be back. Nice to see everybody. Cool.